Hello, everybody. Mike Donahue here in the famous.
Or infamous Brian May.
Nice.
Nice.
Well, thanks everybody for joining. Hope you're enjoying these podcasts. Love for you to like our page and send us some comments. Let us know you're listening to us and that you actually care about us. Love for you to be engaged with us. This week we wanted to do something a little different. I wanted to talk about our testimonies in the sense of the deconstruction process part of that. Both Brian and I have come to Christ. We've shared our testimonies on this podcast. And so we're going to just start with, I wanted to ask Brian some questions about what happened when he began to question some of the teachings and some of the foundation of what he was taught, and what did that process look like, and more personal, like what was it like personally to experience that. So Brian, let's just jump into it. I just want to ask you, what was it like to deconstruct your faith?
Well, it's funny. Deconstruction can be a triggering word for people, and I'll be the first to say that if you're going through some sort of deconstruction, please have your sights on some sort of reconstruction, because that's just the beginning of the journey. It's not the end of the journey. But so it's funny. I was thinking about this the other day, and I think that my deconstruction began like almost at the beginning in some sense. Back in the 80s, the rapture was a big topic, and there used to always be these arguments about, well, is it pre-trib, is it post-trib, is it mid-trib? What is it? What's all this stuff going on? And before I knew anything about the rapture, its origin, or anything like that, I always had this question in my mind. It's like, why would God, if God loved the world, why would he come and take all of the people who are able to testify for him out of the world and just watch the rest of it basically go to hell? It just didn't make sense to me. And the point there being is that my entire questioning process really revolved around who I was growing to understand Jesus to be, and who I was understanding the gospel to be, or what I was understanding the gospel to be, the good news, if you're going to look at it from a Christian perspective. And that was the common theme for me. And so in a large sense, my deconstruction and my reconstruction has been around trying to make up my faith practice line up with the life and the teaching and the character of Jesus. And you would think, Mike, that in a Christian church, that would be, that would be lauded, that would be celebrated, that would be encouraged. But as it turns out, not so much. I know that early on, now a lot of people know on this podcast that after the Mayos left our church here in Bellevue, and Gary and Lori Hoyt took over, Gary and I had been friends since the 8th grade, so we knew each other really well. So we talked a lot. And I would come to him with questions and say, hey, you know what do you think about this? What do you think about that? What do you think about this? And you would talk to other people like that and say, I'm kind of seeing things this way and not that way. And I began to put together that when you started asking questions about different things that just didn't make sense to you in terms of what they were teaching about the Bible, or what they were teaching Christianity was, or what you were seeing and how people were acting, that rather than being welcome, you were sort of viewed as a threat. That red flags begin to come up, and people begin to encourage you to be careful about the books you're reading, or the things that you're thinking about, or the things that you're talking about. And part of what I experienced in my deconstruction was a slow process of growing away from being, accepted as a member in good standing. Now, I'm not going to say that we were ever ostracized or asked, we were eventually, but, asked, not to come to church. But there was a lot of discomfort around some of the things that we were beginning to explore and some of the questions we were beginning to ask. Part of that was because we were in positions of leadership almost from the beginning. But I mean, to sum that up, when you start to ask questions about things that are the people don't want you to ask questions about, uh, it, you are pretty much encouraged not to do that. That begins to create a wedge and drive a wedge between you and the status quo when you're in the kind of institutions that we're talking about.
So when that started to happen, what did you feel? Was there any confusion? Like, am I seeing this right? Am I, because you probably didn't expect the ostrich, some of the results. What am I trying to say? You didn't really expect the pushback that you got, and did that cause you to question what was going on inside of you? Like,
You know,
am I being rebellious? Am I doing, you know what I mean?
I'll be honest with you, it didn't. I mean, I was convinced that I had found something better than I had been offered. And I don't want to go deeply into detail, but probably 7 years ago when we really started going hardcore after this, just reforming our faith. I mean, I read a lot of theology books. I mean, a lot of theology books, big, fat, thick books. Cheryl did too, and we really went through this process of how to make the Bible make sense with Jesus, right? That's the easiest way I can say it. And I was convinced that we were on the right track. Um, and so I didn't so much feel confusion, but what I did feel was angry. And I mean, there was a lot of pride there too. I've said a number of times to people that if I could have done that process different while we were still in church, I would have. Because frankly, I was a jerk. I mean, I wanted to argue, with you and win the argument and get you over to my side. And that's not, that is not the way. Um, However, it did make me feel angry because I felt like, look, I'm just trying to do the best that I can here for me. I'm trying to figure this out to myself. We talked before. I said, Jesus said, work out your own salvation with fear and trembling. Um, to me, that always made it seem like it was a personal journey in a lot of ways. It wasn't this uniform kind of box checking exercise. It's like, okay, now you know this, and now you believe this, and now you do this, and that kind of thing. But it was more organic. It's like any other relationship, and I felt like we were on that path, and it was. I guess it was probably more discouraging than anything else to get pushback when we began to realize that people were threatened by that, and people, uh, were really beginning to caution and warn against us. Like I said, being on that path. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah. I know a lot of people who go through that kind of process. They feel the same way. They feel there's some anger that comes. I think sometimes people feel confusion too. I know for me, I had more of a parental view of the leaders that I had. I think with Gary and you, maybe different with the males, but um, where I felt like I had they were everything to me. I mean, even Rick, who was only a year older than me, I saw him as a, at least a really big brother, not in some ways a dad type figure or a
Right.
parental type figure. And so I really believed what they were talking about. I really believed that they were genuine with what they, what they were saying, what they were pushing. And so later when I realized that a lot of their motives were, in my opinion, skewed and selfish, um, it really hurt. There was some
Yeah.
pain there, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. And I think part of that is, and I agree with that. I mean, I don't want to say that we ever looked at them as parental, but when we came in, I mean, I didn't have a church background. And so we thought these were the God people, right? And I mean, God people are good people, right? They must be, because they're God people. They're doing this. That's just what your expectation was. And we, how do I say this? Whether it's viewing them like you did or viewing them like we did, you have expectations of people, and sometimes you idealize those expectations,
Right.
and they encourage that, idealization of those expectations. And then when you butt up against that, it can be pretty shaking. It can be pretty shattering, and people do react to it in different ways. I mean, you can question yourself, you can become fearful, you can be wait a minute, or you can be, sort of arrogant like me and think, well, I'm right and you're wrong, so let's go after this. And none of those are really good responses. But one of the key things there, I think, is that that's part of what's broken in the system. Is that when you butt up against that resistance to people asking questions, really what you're butting up against is someone says, look, I want you to grow, but I don't want you to grow that way. I want you to grow the way that I want you to grow. And there can be a whole panoply of reactions to that. But when you have people you trust and you begin to encounter that, it has an impact on you. It is very disheartening. It can be very emotional. It can be very discouraging.
Yeah. Yeah. I think of there's times that I started thinking for myself a little bit, and I would mention something to, one of the leaders, and the pushback I would get, it didn't make sense to me. I was like, why this, this is something that God gave me. I felt like God gave me this. I was talking to somebody the other day, and they were talking about this too, and they worked for IHOP at the time, and one of the pastors went over to this other pastor and said, "Hey, what do you think God's saying to you right now?" And for worship, and he said what he thought, and the guy said, "No, that's not what he's saying. He's saying this." And it was like, wait a minute, why'd you ask me then? You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
if you didn't like
Yeah.
the answer, and because he wasn't looking for fluidity, he wasn't looking for a genuine answer. He was looking for what he wanted the guy to be thinking, along those
Right.
lines. Whatever, I don't know what the context was, but whatever. And that's this. To me, that's a great example of what happens in the church. We can have our own mind on something as long as it fits the narrative of what they're trying to do, and usually it's out of controlling people and getting people to work harder and do more and give more, and build their kingdoms, build their church, make their church bigger.
Right. Right. Well, funny, interesting story. So, um, before the Mayos had left Bellevue, Cheryl and I kind of had it with the whole deal, and we kind of fallen out of Sperino and JC Power and all that kind of stuff. I was still working at the school, and part of it was because we had young kids and we were getting busy, but part of it was because it just didn't feel right. But I still worked for the school. I was still valuable to them. So, we got some slack cut there. And then further on down the line, I don't know if you remember the renewals. I don't remember if the renewal, the big renewal movement, I think it was in the 90s. We had a friend who was traveling and holding renewal meetings, and we got involved with her doing that. And because we were looking for something that we weren't finding in church. And so we were involved in that, and that was okay for a while until it, began to get messy. And I'm not endorsing everything that went on there. I'm just saying that's where we're at. That's part of our journey. And so that ran its course. And in 1999, I was actually, speaking of IHOP, I was actually at their conference where they threw away the key and they went 24/7. And I didn't know anything that was going on. I went down there because there was a worship leader named David Roos that I really liked, and I just wanted to be there. But there was some stuff going on there, and I went, wait a minute, there's something happening here, and it seems really, it's intriguing me. It's tugging at my heart. And so, long story short, we came back, and we began to get involved with different sort of prayer movement things in Omaha that were along that line. And we really fell into an intimacy stream. And So for 10 years, we led a group that was essentially studying intimacy with God. We were mostly studying the Song of Solomon, but we were leading prayer meetings and having worship on a weekly basis where we were just encountering the intimacy of God. And to be fair, our church made room for that, right? They made room for that as long as it was kept sort of in its box. Because I think they kind of like the idea of saying, hey, we've got people praying in our church and this is a good thing. But as soon as we begin to say, hey, this really should impact how we live our life, and this really should impact how we grow, and this really should impact how we relate to people, and the things that we're learning and seeing and experiencing inside of this little box don't line up out here in the big box. And, again, I mean, I'll be the first to admit I was very argumentative. I was very uh, had a lot of energy behind me. I came at it from an intellectual standpoint, like these are the facts. None of those things is the right approach, but it's just where I was at. And we began to push back against those things. But again, it was because we were looking for, we sensed that there was something better there to be had in this thing called church and the relationship with Jesus. We weren't finding it in the big box. And when we begin to encounter that, and understand that to a degree and feel that and experience that, really what we wanted to do is we wanted to give it to other people. We wanted to say, hey, look at what we found. This is awesome. And we want you to know about it. And when you come with that, and you get this thanks but no, you know, that is a really hard thing. That is a really impactful thing.
Right. Yeah. It's a slam. It feels like an invalidation. You know, something
It
sad because it was sacred to you. It
Yeah.
wasn't a ministry philosophy. You went to a conference and found some new ministry philosophy that was working. There was something that was spoken into your spirit, like it was an intimate whisper from God, and it was rejected by the leaders. Am I reading that right?
Oh, you're absolutely reading that right. And let me paint the picture very clearly. Most of these meetings that we led, there were, if there were six people there, it was a crowd, right? I mean, sometimes there were, seven, eight, nine, but I mean, we're not talking about 50, 100 people. I mean, we're talking about a handful, of people. So it wasn't like we built this gigantic thing because that's wasn't what it wasn't about. But you're absolutely right. When you run up against that brick wall, it's like, whoa, wait a minute. Are we supposed to be? Because I may have said this before. I know I thought it before, but we were really seeking. And again, if I'm going to use a Bible verse, if you seek me, you will find me when you seek me with your whole heart, and that's what we were doing.
Right. Right. And I think that's really important to talk about because I think a lot of people, not everybody, but a lot of people who have a sacred whisper from God. I'm just putting it in that term, but they were seeking God, and God whispered something to them, and they go to the pastor and say, "Hey, we think this," and it gets shut down. It's confusing. It's like, well, wait a minute, God gave that to me. You're a spiritual leader. Not that they have to see everything the way you see it, and like you said, sometimes the methodology and how you present it is there. But you and Gary had a long relationship. It's not like he didn't know who you were,
Yeah.
But I think that's what happens with a lot of people is we're not encouraged to have a fluid relationship with God where He's talking to us, even
Right.
though biblically that's what they say, right?
Right.
They're saying the right things, but when you actually go and do that, it's a threat to the system. It's a threat to
Right.
the way because if it doesn't line up with checking these boxes off to bring money in, to bring in you know the numbers and that kind of thing, like you said, you had six people. Now let's just say this thing that you were talking about brought in 200 people. I bet you would get his ear. I bet you there'd be
Yeah.
there'd be
Yeah.
more
Yeah.
because it
Yeah.
affects the bottom line, and that's sad. That I think a lot of people go through stuff like that.
It is. It is. And again, I want to be really fair here because I'm just going to push pause on the deconstruction thing. Mike and I talk about a lot of people on this podcast, and I still care about these people. And to some degree, it hurts me that our relationship is where it is today with some of these people we talk about, because most of them were my friends. Most of them, I trusted and respected. With Gary, there was a level of trust between us, probably because we knew each other for a long time. Um, and slowly that eroded because I was moving like really far away from, I think, where he was, but it was still there, and he didn't have to let us do that, right? He could have said, no, we're not going to do that here. And I think that the way I read it is that a lot of times, and you outlined it really well, a lot of times they do see, they'll see, okay, yeah, there's something here. But it gets to a point where the people around you, and they could be leaders, and it's not just ministry, it's about your relationship. It gets to a point where people just aren't willing to go that next step with you. They become uncomfortable with that next step you're taking. And when you reach that point, that's when you really find out what things are all about. And when, if they're people you don't care about, I mean, if they're just dirt, jerks or dorks or whatever, then it doesn't really matter to you. But when they're people that you care about, it is hurtful. So I'm gonna double back on what I said before. It is hurtful. I mean, it hurt. There's a level of hurt in me to this day that things went the way that they went. Because I'd like to think I'm not a callous, uncaring person, right? Uh, and uh, you know, this has been a costly journey for us. I mean, it's been a costly journey for you. We were in the church for over 3 decades, and when you do that, you raise your kids in the church and you develop deep relationships in the church. That's where all your friends are. Because I'm not saying that's the way it should be, but that's the way it is, right? Um, and when you step across that line, all of that goes away.
Yeah.
And, I could sit here and try to be a hard ass and say, I don't care. I don't need them anyway. But the truth of the matter is that we're made for relationship and we're made for community. And it takes a lot of courage to step over that line, because it's costly
Yeah.
and you lose people.
Yeah.
And the way I did it accelerated that loss of people because, like I said, I did not do it in the best way. Um, but I did the only thing I knew how to do at that time.
Yeah. And I
And
appreciate your honesty with that. I do.
one thing we've got to be real when we talk about these things,
Yeah.
because it's easy to set up this black and white, good guy, bad guy. This is right. This is wrong. But all of this stuff is way more complicated than that. All of it
Right.
is. Relationships between people are very complicated. The reasons people do things are super complicated. Um, and your faith is, I like the word you use. You use this word a lot. It is sacred. And um, so my wife Cheryl just got done with a 3-year spiritual direction program, and you know maybe can we talk about that someday. But one of the things they teach them is that it's really more of a companioning program. You're just
Say
like
that again. What's the
it's
word
a
again?
companion. You're companioning. So you're
Okay.
walking with people through whatever they're walking through. You're not a counselor, you're not an advisor. You're just being with them. You're helping them talk through things, be reflective. But one of the things they say is that you don't really want to just go in there and blow up their faith um, practice. That's not your job. Your job is just to walk with them through whatever they're walking through, down whatever path they're walking down, and helping them find their way. And I love that concept because I think it's really healthy. But the problem with that is it can get messy, right? I mean, it can get messy. Um, my own testimony. I mean, there's a man. I'm just going to say his name, Walter Hooker. He's a pastor at at my old church. And one of the first times I talked to him, I made him cry because I came up and I was a jerk, and he'd said something in a sermon, and I just kind of came at him hard, like, how can you say that? Blah, 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 blah. And fast forward to today, he was on the inside with me, and he walked through some of the most intense part of this process with me, and it was ugly, and I was ugly. And all he did through this process was be my friend, was to love me and to care about me. And that was the most authentic, part of my faith experience. When I say authentic, the most Jesus-like part of my faith experience in my 30 some odd years at that church. Because all he did was love me and walk through me as I was trying to untangle this mess that I was in. And part of the process of deconstruction is to getting to that place where your faith is your own. And I know a lot of people are going to red flag and say, oh, you're going to go, blah, 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 this and that, and this and that. It's like, well, I'll just say to you, then you really don't trust Jesus very much, if that's what you think. You need to go back and rethink that. If you think that you can lead a human heart better than Jesus can, then, step up to the plate and prove it. But I don't think you can. But that's really the goal here, is to get to this place where you take all of the garbage out of the way so that you can begin to walk on that journey in a way that is real and sacred to you.
Right. And that's really, it's what it comes down to, is it's got to be sacred to you, which, doesn't always follow a script. I just think that's what I have a problem with, is the script they hand you, right? You have to
Right.
think this way, feel that way. Don't do this, do that. Don't drink alcohol, do this, all that. It's the set of rules. I mean, again, I go to church, and I was sitting in church today, and it was good. I love my pastor. He's a great guy. I know him personally. He's a friend. But afterwards, I talked to him about the sermon because, again, what I sat and listened and heard was, you're giving me a script again. You're telling me how to live it. But the root of being he was talking about being self-centered. The root of being self-centered, to me, is not being fulfilled, right? Not having contentment. So so teach me how to do that. Teach me how to be content in my relationship with Christ. Teach me how to be validated to the point where I don't need to be selfish, right? That I'm content in Christ. I'm content in my relationship with him. Don't teach me how to be a Christian. Teach me
Right.
to get closer to Jesus. That's really my heart cry. I'm sick of sitting in church and you teaching me how to be a Christian. I don't want to learn how to be a Christian. I want to learn how to know Jesus more in the middle of my stuff, in dealing with what I'm dealing with in life, right? I speak in public
Right.
schools. I hear the most horrible stories. Teach me how to be close to Jesus when I'm hearing these stories. If you're a plumber, if you're a doctor, if you're a lawyer, how do I incorporate Jesus Christ into my life? Not Christianity. Don't teach me how to be a Christian. Teach me how to know him more. I don't know if that's making any sense.
No, that makes a lot of sense. I go back to a couple of stories that Jesus told when I think about these kinds of topics. One was his encounter with the woman at the well, and the other is his encounter with the woman taken in adultery. And we don't have time to get into it right now, but both of those are very defining pictures of Jesus to me, because they are how he interfaced with all the people in the story, whether it was the woman taken in adultery or the folks that came to stone her. Just really shows me what it means to have a Jesus-oriented faith. And maybe we could talk about that someday. But I'll say this about that. In today's church world, as I've experienced it, for the most part, um, it would go down a completely different way.
Yeah.
Which says to me that if my faith is built around church and what church is telling me, and it's not built around who I see and understand Jesus to be, and you know what? Who I see and understand Jesus to be today is going to be different. Hopefully it'll be better tomorrow and more complete tomorrow. But
Right.
if it's built around my church faith rather than my my relational understanding, then I need to move out of that church faith box and into this place where this really person who represents true love is not telling me how to live, but is showing me what it means to be a complete and a whole human being
Yeah.
in a broken and hurting world, and even in the midst of my own brokenness and hurt.
I had a mom come to me. I spoke at a school this week, and she sat down with me and told me about her daughter, and they're twins, and one of them was being really obstinate and mean, and so I said, "Tell me what tell me about the interactions." And she was going on about how, she kept telling her, trying to correct this behavior, right? Just trying to correct the behavior of this girl. And I told the mom, I said, bad behavior to me just is an indicator of bad belief.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd spent a little time with this girl too at um, a volleyball practice, and so I was watching her the whole time. And that sounds creepy. I was watching anybody else too, but anyways, um, the but I had been already alerted to the situation, so I was watching the whole dynamic play out. And I said to the mom, I said, "Stop teaching her. Stop trying to correct the behavior. She hates herself, and and that's just manifesting that way.
Mm-hmm.
She's mad at you. She's mad at God. She's mad at everything that you've told me. But the bottom line is she hates herself. She doesn't see value in who she is. And because she was saying, oh, she was cursing God and everything else. She's not cursing God. She hates herself. So she's just projecting that onto you. And I think that's what I fell in love with about Jesus. Is I never felt when I first, the sacred part of my relationship with him is I never felt like he wanted me to correct my behavior to make
Right,
him look better. I felt like he
right,
wanted me to correct my behavior because he loved me very much, and he knew that my behavior was just in my bad behavior was an indicator that my heart was hurt and broken and needed mending. But Christianity to me has turned into, let's be the morality police and correct the behavior
yeah,
of everybody and key in on that. Get to the root. Get to the root, which is, well, you said it earlier, the character of God. Those stories you just mentioned just highlight the character of who Jesus is.
mm-hmm.
That's what I want to fall in love with. I want to know his character. I don't want to know his actions because they're fluid. They change. They're you know what I mean? Like, give me his heart, and then it'll manifest itself
Right,
in the right behavior. And we get it backwards. We're trying to teach people how to behave, and then that's going to make you like Christ. No,
right,
it's the opposite.
right,
It's to get to the heart of what's going on.
right. You know, Jesus really didn't go after a whole lot of people um, in the stories that are presented to us in the Bible. The people he went after were the Pharisees, right? What did he call them? He called them whitewashed walls, empty sepulchres full of dead men's bones.
Yeah.
Now, I don't think that meant he cared less about those individual people. I think he was speaking to what they represented. And what you have described and I have described about our church experience is 100% in line with a whitewashed wall, an empty sepulcher full of dead men's bones. It's all about what it looks like on the outside. It's all about keeping those things together. And that is something far different from what I understand Jesus came to show us.
Right.
I have friends that, I mean, I said it here before, I'll say it again. Cheryl and I are trying to go to church. I'm, I have a different view of the utility of church in my life than I ever did before. I'm not going to say it's worthless, but it's not going to be the center of my existence either. So, I know people who have gone through this process and just want nothing to do with any of it, right? Just nothing to do with any of it. And, that's okay because, Jesus, God, love, the universe, whatever you want to call it, they can take it, because they don't care about their reputation. They don't care about your conformity to their image. They care about you.
Right.
And
Right.
fundamentally, that's what Jesus came. One of the things that I see in Jesus coming and in the stories that I read in the Bible, that's what they say to me. It's like, wow, he really doesn't care about his ministry or his image or how many people are following. He cares about these individual people, which, if you go back and you just do a little perusal of that, all of those people were outcasts in society. They weren't the pretty people. They weren't the beautiful people. They were the broken, they were the hated, they were all of those kinds
Yep.
of things. So
Yeah.
I guess those are my closing thoughts.
Well, I think those are great closing thoughts, Brian. Thank you so much for your vulnerability and honesty about, your process. We're still all in process trying to
Right.
figure, you know, this whole thing out. I know that I from what I understand about who Jesus Christ really is, I like that a lot.
Yeah.
The way I see it lived out in church in America, I don't like. I'll just be honest. I don't like it.
Yeah.
It's mean. It's bullying. It's vindictive. It's weaponized.
Agreed.
I don't like it at all. But from what I see of him, I really, the best I know, I really love that. I love the humility. I love that he cared about people, not institutions, and not institutions. So, thanks so much for your honesty, like I said. And those of you that are watching this, keep watching. We are going to have a couple of guests here coming up. One of them was a victim of some of this stuff. I don't want to give too much away, but be tuning in because we're really looking forward to having her on the podcast. So that'll be in the next couple of weeks. So yeah, it's going to be fun. Thanks for tuning in and like us on all the platforms and all that kind of stuff. And we will see you next week. All right.
See you.